Welcome to One Decision. We're here at the Warsaw Security Conference. I'm your host, Christina Ruffini, of course, here with my co-host, Sir Richard Dearlove, and I'm going to allow our fabulous guest to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Clément Beaune. I was a former Europe minister in France, and I'm now directing an entity, a kind of government think tank called High Commission for Strategy and Planning.
So I think we obviously want to talk to you about European defense and European defense versus NATO and how America fits in or doesn't fit in. But I just want to ask very simply, is Europe ready for a war with Russia?
I think it's more and more aware of the threats.
Okay.
Of course, Ukrainian war is a big wake-up call. We should always recall that it didn't start in 2022, it actually started in 2014.
Yes, the Ukrainian who was just in this chair said
Exactly.
the same thing.
But,
yes.
I think it's very important. Our Ukrainian friends are right to insist on this. I also insisting on this because a lot of EU countries started to reinvest a lot in their military spending already in 2014,
After 2014.
Of course, more the eastern part or central part of Europe,
Yes.
less the western part of it. France was one of the biggest players already in European defense, but we are doing much more. But basically, it's a decade of progressive awareness. Are we ready to fight all the threats or to face all the threats? I think not yet. Meaning two things, meaning probably we are not still doing what we need to do in terms of capabilities, in terms of investment, in terms of European cooperations also to avoid fragmentation, duplication and so on. And probably also, to be very direct and honest, we should do more ourselves and be aware that it means Europeans spending more, doing more in relation with the US. I think this alliance that we have, through NATO in particular, remains crucial, and it will remain crucial on both sides, I do hope. But of course, the EU countries mainly should do more and invest more and demonstrate their commitment over the long run also to their US friends.
The issue that concerns me most is the coordination of European defense spending
Yes.
with NATO and how you actually make a separation and how you produce a result which is cohesive and contributes. Because, I mean, we already have a military organization.
Yes.
So what if you take the vision of, let's say, European defense funds,
Well,
how are you going to, actually coordinate and focus that?
I hear the fear of duplication or not being clear about the respective roles or missions or tasks of EU and NATO. To be very honest, I think there is so much more to do, to pay for, to invest in, that the day when it's two big military organizations being in competition, I think has not come. I think will not come. And if this question really arises as a concrete matter, it will be good news because it means that the EU countries will spend a lot for their own defense, which I think is necessary, but we are not there yet. To be more concrete, the EU is not a military organization. It will not become the same as NATO. It should not, I think. What NATO brings very concretely here again to on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean is working together. This bound with the US. Of course, the US will not become an EU member. So we need this transatlantic alliance complementary to what we can do at the EU or European level itself. And also interoperability, because the NATO is an old alliance now, which has proven effective in making countries and armies and military people work together, and we should not lose that. But should the EU member states coordinate more in terms of their new defense programs, not duplicate and pay more? I think yes.
The area where the EU could, has a capability is to coordinate and rationalize arms production. So you could have a common European policy which, as it were, makes a focus, so there's not duplication in terms of defense spending in the member states. I mean, is that a vision which France shares?
How do you track that? Because one of the complaints we hear even within NATO, even as countries try to get to the 3% or 5% threshold, and this came from another European defense minister who flagged, yes, they might be spending 5%, but to your point, they may not be spending the correct 5%, or they may be spending it on something that another country needs to do. So what is the solution
That's
for
what
that?
I will not start with the organizations themselves, but with the goals.
Okay.
You're right, going in this direction.
Yeah.
The NATO has been the place since 2014 now, where we set the targets, basically. And I think it's good to have this in this format. And now the 5% target, 3.5 plus 1.5,
Right.
3.5 really on the military stuff, is good, and I think it was a good outcome of the latest NATO summits. Then, as you said, we have to spend it wisely, meaning first to reach the targets, which is a big increase in the investment we do in defense. Just to take the example of France, it will mean that we will double between 2025 and the early 2030s in terms of billions of euro, the amounts that we spend in the government budget every year in defense, doubling this. So it's a big investment effort in terms.
For example, if you take sixth generation aircraft, you have two programs, one with Rafale and one with BA, British Aircraft Corporation, BAC. I mean, clearly that's not really a very practical arrangement.
No, I think the figures, we did a memo in my capacity of in the High Commission for Planning, saying that recalling the figures, which are very impressive, in the US, if you take all the big programs of armaments, it's like between 35 and 40 different types of armaments.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Same perimeter in the EU, 27 member states, not even including the UK, it's 150 plus. So this big fragmentation problem is also a supplementary issue when we want to be more effective and to spend more. So if we say it very simply, we have to spend more and we have to coordinate more. How do we coordinate? I'm very pragmatic. Maybe sometimes through NATO, but I think it's not the right format, honestly, because it's more transatlantic, or through member states ad hoc cooperations, which didn't prove so effective, but it may happen. We have it between France and Germany so far. And I think also through EU. Why? Because the EU has two advantages. It can bring money. It has a common budget, so it can add money to the national investments. Plus, it is long-term. The EU is an institution. An institution brings long-term vision, because what is at risk is that we forget about the threats. If, I hope, tomorrow, meaning as soon as possible, the war sometimes stops in Ukraine, the Russian threat will remain still for EU and for us as allies. It does mean that we should still invest in our military spending, not just this year and the 2 or 3 years to come, but over the medium to long run. And when you have an institution, processes, voting procedures and so on, like the EU, it helps having or keeping this long-term momentum.
What about the possibility of a joint nuclear umbrella Anglo-French for Europe?
Well, you have to be very cautious and precise about this, which I'll be as a French citizen.
You've had a so-called policy of tout azimut for...
Yeah, but there are two different things that we should not mix in the French debate and in the European debate. Joint meaning common decision? No. We will not share the responsibility or the decision-making process, because if you share it, it's not the same doctrine, it's not the same approach. It means that you are not...
suggested by the Germans that there should be a much closer nuclear cooperation between UK and France.
Yes, but I don't think anyone is talking really about sharing the decision process. What is at stake, and France has been open to that actually since a few decades now, but more precisely these years, is to say, when we define our vital interests that are protected by this nuclear armament, we should include a European dimension. And what a European dimension means in terms of territory, in terms of types of threats, this can be discussed. But the decision-making process is in the hands of the President of the French Republic, because it cannot work otherwise it's not dissuasion.
Speaking of the President of the French Republic, I want to ask you about the Macron effect, and because we've been talking about this with a couple of people, but I covered the last I covered Trump the first time, yes. I covered the Biden administration, I've covered the second administration, and I've watched these fluctuations and stances in the White House on their Ukraine policy. And there was a big turn at the United Nations where you had Trump coming out and saying he thinks that maybe Ukraine can fight back for every bit of territory. How much of that do you think is an influence of President Macron, who seems to have a line and seems to have figured out how to get Trump on side in a way? And Starmer's getting better at it as well, but I think he's taking Macron's lead. You were an advisor for the president. What is his approach, and what does he do that works?
Well, I hope what President Macron has been doing as French president, but also as European leader, now the most experienced European leader around the table, has played a role. I do think so. Probably, I would say, in two respects. First, bringing credibility, because I hope President Trump has realized that the Europeans were serious about their support to Ukraine. Of course, we are not bringing the same amount of military support or technological support to Ukraine because we don't have the same capacities. But we are bringing definitely a lot of financial support, a lot of civil support, and even military support to some extent. I think realizing that the Europeans were playing a key role in protecting Ukraine has made its way, I guess, through the White House. And also because there have been so many engagements, discussions between President Trump, President Macron, other European leaders, President Stubb from Finland, Chancellor Merz, and so on.
Yes, we've heard the Finnish president and his golf clubs have also had quite an impact.
And you know how it works between leaders. Of course, it's about geopolitics and politics and interests. Values, I hope, but also personal touch. And I think there is a relation which dates back to Trump 1 administration between Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron. They are very different. They don't have the same ideas and things, a lot of things probably, but they have a channel. And President Macron has been very clear, especially towards the US, which is our oldest and most important ally, saying even when we disagree, even when we don't understand each other in the short run, we should keep the channels open and the personal relations open, which I think works.
But if you take the specific issue of Anglo-French relations, the intelligence, security, defence, military relationships bilaterally are very, very close. And they've remained very close, despite Brexit. But if you now take European defence funds, it looks as though President Macron is not keen on British participation. That seems to be a bit of an anomaly given the seriousness of the situation we all face. I mean, there was a suggestion at one stage that he would trade them for improved fishing rights.
No, we are not mixing issues between fisheries and defence.
Well, I hope not.
But no, be reassured. But of course there was a Brexit effect because EU is a political project. Of course, defence is not the first dimension historically and still now in the EU actions and policies, but it's a political alliance and club. So there was a sovereign decision by the British people to leave the EU, which we regret, but we accept. And it created a moment first when we focused so much on negotiating the treaty of leaving the EU that we probably lost time, both of us, or all of us in Europe, on the real matters, on the real common interests, which are mainly defence. But be reassured, the cooperation has remained. Intelligence is a good example. And now there is a new chapter because time has passed. The new British government is probably more pro-European and clear about its willingness to cooperate more. I insist on the fact that when we discussed, and I was directly involved, the exit treaty of the UK, it was at the time the British government which did not want to have a chapter on security and defence included in the treaty.
No,
I hope we move towards that.
I'm well aware of that. Yeah,
and we will have to, it's still quite recent, it was a trauma somehow for people across Europe, for leaders, and I think we have to reinvent cooperation. But look at Ukraine, the so-called coalition of the willing, the meetings between Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and others. There is a very good relation now and a working relation.
Before we let you go, I know we're running out of time. I did want to ask you if you think Ukraine will ever become a member of NATO.
I don't know on NATO, to be honest, and I don't want to say things which might prove untrue.
Fair enough.
I'm sure that Ukraine will be a member of the EU.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have a very busy schedule. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.